could possibly terrify the Mongols. These were warriors who drank from the skulls of their enemies, who conquered nations without blinking, who laughed at death. But there was something that made even the toughest Mongol warrior's blood run cold. A disease that turned you into a living corpse, piece by piece. Today, we're uncovering the Mongols' desperate fight against leprosy and the bizarre, horrifying methods they use to try to stop it. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive into some Mongol madness. Let's start with what leprosy actually was, because this disease was absolutely nightmare fuel. Leprosy, also called Hansen's disease, is caused by a bacteria that attacks your nerves, skin, and mucous membranes. But here's what made it so terrifying in medieval times. It happened slowly. You didn't just wake up sick one day. Instead, over months and years, you'd gradually lose feeling in your hands and feet. Your fingers and toes would become numb, which meant you'd accidentally injure them without realizing it. Those injuries would get infected. The infections would cause tissue damage. Eventually, your body would reabsorb the damaged tissue, making it look like your fingers and toes were being eaten away. Your face would develop lesions and nodules. Your nose could collapse. Your eyebrows would fall out. You'd become unrecognizable. And the whole time, you were fully conscious and aware of what was happening to you. Now imagine you're a Mongol living in the 13th century. You don't know about bacteria. You don't understand how diseases spread. All you know is that some people in your tribe are slowly transforming into something that doesn't look human anymore. Their faces are melting, their limbs are disappearing, and it seems to spread to others who spend time around them. What would you think? The Mongols, like most medieval peoples, believed this was either a curse from angry spirits, punishment from the gods, or the work of demons literally consuming the person from within. And they weren't entirely wrong to be terrified. Leprosy was genuinely contagious, though nowhere near as contagious as they feared. So how did the Mongols even encounter leprosy in the first place? Here's where it gets interesting. Leprosy has been around for thousands of years, affecting populations across Asia, Africa, and Europe. But the Mongol Empire's rapid expansion in the 13th century brought them into contact with infected populations like never before. As they conquered China, Central Asia, Persia, and pushed into Eastern Europe, Mongol warriors and traders were suddenly interacting with dozens of different populations, many of whom had endemic leprosy. The disease spread along the same trade routes the Mongols controlled, the famous Silk Road that connected east and west. Mongol soldiers would return from campaigns in infected regions, bringing the disease back to the steppes. Captives taken as slaves or concubines could be infected. Trade caravans moved goods, people, and bacteria across vast distances. But here's what made it especially dangerous for the Mongols. Their nomadic lifestyle actually helped and hurt them simultaneously. On one hand, they were constantly moving, which meant they didn't have the dense, stationary populations where leprosy could spread most easily. On the other hand, they lived in close quarters, in gers with extended family, shared drinking vessels and food, and had limited understanding of hygiene beyond their spiritual taboos. If one person in a ger developed leprosy, everyone in that tent was at risk through prolonged close contact. And because the disease could take years to show symptoms, an infected person might spread it to their entire family before anyone knew they were sick. The Mongols' response to leprosy combined practical exile with spiritual terror. Once someone showed clear signs of the disease, the skin lesions, the loss of sensation, the physical deformities, they were usually expelled from the community. Not killed, importantly, but cast out. The infected person would be given some basic supplies, maybe a tent, some food, minimal possessions, and sent away from the tribe. They'd be told to go live alone or find other infected people to live with. This wasn't cruelty exactly, or at least the Mongols didn't see it that way. This was self-preservation. They believed the disease was contagious, and they were right. They believed keeping the infected person around would doom the entire tribe, and they had good reason to think so. But imagine being that person. You're slowly losing your body, you're in pain, you're terrified, and now your own family, people you fought beside, eaten with, shared a tent with your entire life, are forcing you to leave and survive alone on the harsh steppe. Some infected Mongols were sent to isolated colonies where lepers lived together, usually near water sources but far from regular camps. These weren't organized hospitals or treatment centers like you might find in medieval Europe, where Christian monks cared for lepers. These were just places where exiled people congregated because being around others, even others suffering the same fate, was better than being completely alone. The healthy population would occasionally leave food or supplies at a distance, but direct contact was forbidden. If an infected person tried to return to their tribe or approach too closely, they could be driven away with threats or violence. The spiritual fear was that intense. Now let's talk about the absolutely wild cures the Mongols attempted, because this is where desperation met zero medical knowledge, and the results were bizarre. Shamans were called in to treat leprosy because they treated everything else, right? The first approach was always spiritual. The shaman would perform rituals to identify which spirit or demon was causing the disease. They'd go into trances, consult the spirit world, and come back with a diagnosis. Maybe the patient had offended a water spirit by washing in a sacred river. Maybe they'd angered their ancestors. Maybe a demon had possessed them. The cure would then involve elaborate ceremonies with drumming, chanting, animal sacrifices, and offerings to appease the offended spirit. Did this work? Of course not. But in the very early stages, before anyone knew it was leprosy, some people might have gotten better on their own, which would reinforce belief in the shaman's power. When spiritual cures failed, the Mongols tried physical remedies. And this is where things get truly desperate and weird. One treatment involved bloodletting, which was popular across many medieval cultures. The theory was that bad blood was causing the disease, so if you drained out some blood, you'd remove the sickness. Shamans or healers would make cuts and let blood drain into bowls, sometimes taking alarming amounts. This obviously didn't help, and probably made patients weaker and more susceptible to other infections. But they kept doing it because what else could they do? Another treatment involved applying various substances to the skin lesions. Mongols would make pastes from animal fat mixed with herbs, crushed minerals, or even ground up insects. They'd slather these on the open sores, hoping to heal them. Some mixtures included mercury or arsenic, poisonous substances that they thought had healing properties because they killed parasites and bad spirits. In reality, these toxic treatments probably caused additional damage. Horse urine was sometimes used to wash infected areas because ammonia was thought to have cleansing properties. They weren't wrong that ammonia could disinfect, but it did nothing for the underlying bacterial infection causing leprosy. There were dietary cures too. Some healers believed that eating specific organs from certain animals could cure the disease. Eating raw liver from a wolf, for example, because wolves were spiritually powerful and their strength might transfer to the sick person. Drinking mare's blood mixed with fermented kumis. Consuming ground-up bones from eagles, because eagles were messengers to Tengri and might carry prayers for healing. None of this did anything except make desperate people eat increasingly disgusting things. One particularly disturbing treatment involved something called substitution magic. The idea was that you could transfer the disease to an animal and then kill the animal, taking the disease with it. A shaman would perform a ritual where they'd symbolically move the leprosy from the patient to, say, a dog or sheep. They'd touch the animal to the patient's lesions, chant incantations, and then kill the animal and burn or bury it far from camp. Obviously, the patient still had leprosy afterward, but the temporary hope this ritual provided might have offered some psychological relief, which was probably the only real benefit. Some Mongols, particularly those who traded with Chinese, Persians, or other cultures, might have tried imported remedies. Traditional Chinese medicine had various treatments for skin diseases, though nothing that actually cured leprosy. Persian medicine, influenced by ancient Greek medical theories, had its own approaches involving balancing humors and using herbal preparations. Desperate wealthy Mongols might pay for these foreign treatments, but the results were the same: failure. The really heartbreaking part is that leprosy is actually very treatable if you catch it early and have the right antibiotics, which of course wouldn't exist for another 700 years. The Mongols were fighting an invisible bacterial enemy with prayer, ritual, and toxic pastes. They never stood a chance. And the cruelest part, leprosy isn't actually that contagious. You need prolonged close contact with an untreated infected person, and even then, about 95% of people are naturally immune. The Mongols were exiling and isolating people who, in many cases, posed minimal actual risk. But they had no way of knowing that. The social stigma of leprosy in Mongol society was absolute. Once you showed symptoms, you weren't just sick, you were spiritually contaminated. People believed you'd been marked by evil forces. Even if you were a legendary warrior who'd fought in 100 battles, even if you were from a noble family, leprosy reduced you to an untouchable outcast. Your name might still be spoken, but you were considered already dead in a social sense. Marriages could be annulled if one partner developed leprosy. Children might be taken away from infected parents. All your possessions would be burned or buried because they were considered spiritually tainted. The fear was that strong. There are historical accounts from travelers to the Mongol Empire who mentioned seeing groups of lepers living in isolated areas. Marco Polo, in his travels through the Mongol Empire in the late 13th century, noted the presence of lepers and described how they were treated as separate from regular society. Other travelers noted that infected individuals would sometimes band together in small communities, creating their own survival networks since they couldn't rely on their original tribes. These leper colonies were grim places, people with varying stages of the disease trying to help each other while dealing with their own deterioration. Some infected Mongols reportedly turned to extreme religious devotion, either deepening their shamanic practices or converting to Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam if they'd been exposed to those faiths through conquest. The logic was that if the disease was spiritual punishment, perhaps extreme piety could earn divine mercy. Buddhist monasteries in Mongol-controlled territories sometimes cared for lepers as an act of compassion, though the patients were still isolated from the general population. This was actually one of the few places where infected people might receive consistent food and shelter, even if no actual medical treatment existed. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the psychological trauma of leprosy in Mongol society. Imagine watching your own body slowly betray you. You're losing fingers. Your face is changing. You're in constant pain from infected wounds you can't feel happening. And on top of the physical horror, everyone you love is terrified of you. Your family forces you to leave. Your friends won't come near you. You're completely alone, facing a slow, disfiguring decline toward death. Some infected people reportedly committed suicide rather than face the full progression of the disease and the absolute social isolation it brought. Can you blame them? In a culture where community, family, and tribal identity meant everything, being cast out was almost worse than the disease itself. The Mongols' fear of leprosy also affected their military campaigns and governance. When occupying conquered territories, Mongol administrators would sometimes order infected people in cities to be relocated to areas outside the walls. This was partly practical disease control and partly spiritual fear of contamination. In some cases, entire neighborhoods where leprosy was endemic might be burned down in an attempt to eliminate the disease. The Mongols didn't understand that burning buildings didn't kill bacteria that lived in people, but they did it anyway because they were desperate to stop the spread. Interestingly, as the Mongol Empire grew and absorbed more sophisticated medical traditions from conquered peoples, some Mongol nobles started consulting foreign doctors about leprosy. Persian physicians, trained in Galenic medicine, would be brought in to examine infected people and offer treatments. These treatments were still ineffective since nobody understood bacteria yet, but they were at least based on careful observation of symptoms and attempts at systematic treatment, rather than purely spiritual explanations. Some wealthy infected Mongols might spend fortunes trying every available cure, traveling to distant healers, consulting multiple traditions, all while their condition inevitably worsened. The tragic reality is that the Mongols' approach to leprosy, isolation, spiritual remediation, desperate and useless treatments, was pretty much the same as every other medieval culture's approach. Europeans quarantined lepers in leprosariums. Islamic societies had laws requiring segregation of infected people. Chinese authorities established leper colonies. Everyone was terrified, everyone exiled the infected, and nobody had a cure. The Mongols weren't uniquely cruel or unusually superstitious. They were facing a terrifying disease with the only tools they had: fear, faith, and futile hope. So what's the lesson here? The Mongols, despite being incredible warriors and administrators who built the largest land empire in history, were completely helpless against a microscopic enemy they couldn't see or understand. Their strongest warrior, their wisest shaman, their most powerful Khan, none of it mattered when bacteria came calling. Leprosy was the great equalizer, proving that no amount of conquest or military genius could protect you from disease. And their response, exiling the infected, performing useless rituals, trying toxic cures, showed how fear and ignorance drove decision-making when confronted with something that couldn't be fought with arrows or intimidation. If you made it through this whole video, you now understand one of the most tragic aspects of medieval Mongol life. Hit that like button, subscribe to Mongol Madness for more deep dives into the real history of the world's most misunderstood empire, and drop a comment telling me which of those bizarre cures shocked you the most. The mercury paste? The wolf liver eating? The substitution magic? Let me know. And be thankful that if you get a bacterial infection today, you can just take antibiotics instead of being exiled to the wilderness with a bowl of horse urine and some ground-up eagle bones. Modern medicine is amazing. See you in the next one.